Hello Popcorn Junkies, and welcome to a movie review of The Bikeriders. The Bikeriders. That's a Hell's Angel in the background. Let me undo that top button because, let's face it, we want to get in touch with the inner Hell's Angel. This is a bikers movie. How are you about bikers? Easy Rider? The Wild One? Was it the Wild Bunch? The Wild One? Electra Glide in Blue. In fact, most of my childhood I lived with a great long cinematic poster in the hall of our flat, which was one great big shot. I think of the Grand Canyon or Death Valley with a motorbike. Mum's previous girlfriends, they were into bikes. I've been around bikers. So if anyone was going to be into biking or biker movies, in many ways it could have been and should have been me. It could have been me. I wasn't really into bikes. Easy Rider was kind of cool, but I think the thing that kind of as a student one liked about Easy Rider was more the Dennis Hopper, kick back, laid back. I mean, as much Apocalypse Now was part of that era as Easy Rider was, it was less about the biking. It was more about the chilledness, the spliffness, the 70s, 60s kind of, hallucinogenic kind of madness. Anyway, so this is The Bikeriders. This is a film directed by Jeff Nichols. Jeff Nichols, I haven't seen any of his other films. I've only seen Mud, which was the Matthew McConaughey film, in which two young teenage boys find this kind of, absconded prisoner or fugitive in the marshes. I liked it. There was something about it I quite liked. Matthew McConaughey was difficult to understand, and we had great humour in this house trying to work out a few of his lines, but there was something about it. There was a gritty kind of sort of grittiness to it. So that film, actually Mud, made me more inclined to want to go and see this actually. Now, the film is based, not loosely, it's based wholly on what they call a coffee table book. I think back in the day I don't think they had coffee table books back then. It's a book of photographs of a sort of biker clan in Michigan or near Chicago. And these were stylized black and white photos by a guy called Danny Lyon. Neat black and white photos. Think of that sort of stylish, kind of cool, kind of all that kind of stuff. At the time it would have been quite sort of, revelatory to sort of get access to a sort of Hell's Angels style group or gang. It stars Austin Butler, he of Elvis, and more recently Dune. It also stars Tom Hardy, who I have to confess, when we watched the trailer, I kind of caricatured and slightly sort of teased in terms of the curious choices he makes when it comes to the accents and voices of his characters, but more on that in a moment. It also stars Jodie Comer as essentially Austin Butler, or Benny as he plays in the film, Benny's love interest, but she's the kind of access point. She's the person who's basically talking to Danny Lyon in the film in the form of Mike Faist, fleshing out the cast, thickening up the cast. You've also got in there, you've got Boyd Holbrook, who I first came across in Narcos alongside Pedro Pascal. He's rather brilliant. You got Michael Shannon playing a real sort of, lost boy or a kind of lost biker. Norman Reedus, who can forget him from The Walking Dead? Oh my God, The Walking Dead. And we've also got sort of a relative newcomer, Toby Wallace, who's in there, who plays the young kid, or the kid, the upstart, the one who wants to kind of steal Tom Hardy's crown, if you like, who we've seen before in Baby Tooth, and he's a sensational young actor. I feel like he's the new Benicio del Toro. And so what do we have here? We have a portrait of a gang, and it's told through the essentially three prioritised lenses of Jodie Comer, Austin Butler, and Tom Hardy, with other members of the kind of gang taking precedence and coming to sort of step into the fore throughout. They're called the Vandals Motorcycle Club, a fictionalised version of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, which is what the book was based on. And as I say, this is a bikers movie. It riffs on the sort of Hollywood obsession with biker films, right down to the fact that the founder of the group, the founder of the organisation, played by Tom Hardy, Johnny, there's a scene with him even watching The Wild One, or was it The Wild Bunch? The Wild One. Anyway, so it's Marlon Brando. And Marlon Brando is very, very present in this film in a number of ways. In fact, not only is Marlon Brando present in this film, I'd argue that James Dean is present in this film too. For me, this is a film that speaks as much to the sort of Hollywood tradition of films like Rebel Without a Cause, Giant, that kind of stuff, as much as it does to straight out and out biker movies. If you're a motorcyclist, if you're a motorbike, if you're a greasehead, if you like speed and you like throttle and all that malarkey, you're going to love this film regardless. Why does one come to any film like this? I'm always interested in anything that's willing to explore, if you like, the DNA or what goes into masculinity, toxic masculinity, macho-ness and all that kind of stuff. But I think this is also a film about belonging, not just notoriety, because I think what is interesting about this film is that this club isn't necessarily sort of born out of a desire to harm, hurt, or be threatening to people. Violence comes in, drugs comes in, prostitution comes in, sexual assault comes in, brutality comes in, mob-like behaviour creeps into the story of this group. But the original genesis of this motorcycling club, as manifested in Tom Hardy, it was one of kind of, I think, belonging and having a sense of family outside of, say, conventional family. It's about being an outsider. Thinking of all those films like The Outsiders or Rumblefish, it's about belonging, and it's about finding a sort of counterculture. This is about a time when, you didn't exist in tribes or groups on social media or in the virtual world, but you were defined by, doing something with your hands, as Michael Shannon's character says. It's about mechanics, it's about engines, it's about chrome, it's about grime and oil and all that malarkey. So this starts in a sort of, I'd say this film starts in a very sort of romanticised, Hollywood idyllic kind of, there's the road, Jack Kerouac, I've got my bike, and it's Austin Butler all the way through. Austin Butler does very little else other than sort of simper or smoulder. Now, he smoulders all the way through this film, quite literally. Imagine being so cool that the way in which you make Jodie Comer's long-standing boyfriend leave is not by having a fight, not by threatening, not by even kissing Jodie Comer or being caught in a clinch. No, all you do is you pull your bike up outside their house, hitch it, sit there, light a cigarette, smoke it, and just look and wait. And he waits. And he gets what he wants. Jodie Comer's boyfriend runs away. The storytelling structure of this film is Mike Faist playing Danny Lyon, the photographer of the book, interviewing Jodie Comer. And she takes us into this world. She provides us with briefly sketched character portraits. She gives us timescales. She gives us a sense of what it was like when she first met them. And as a device, it's quite conventional. And I have to confess, I was saying to a friend, Michelle, by text, she was, in many regards for me, the weakest link in this. And I don't think she was the weakest link because of Jodie, and I don't think she was the weakest link because of her performance. As I understand it, her voice is incredibly close to and like the voice of the woman she's playing. Where I think Jodie Comer was let down, and where I think the film ultimately is let down, is by the kind of convention of us being sort of, spoon-fed where we're going at every stage of the day by this quite sort of simplistic and really quite kind of crass and I found almost sort of insulting device of Mike Faist just sat with a microphone and tell us what happened next, and tell us what happened next. It was that risible. Poor old Mike Faist, who recently was in Challengers, he's either holding a tennis racket or he's holding a microphone, and it just didn't do it for me. It was too obvious, it was too literal, and I think where this film was at its best was where there was just a brooding, building, simmering sense of male frustration or male rivalry or male belonging, or even male humour, which I think at times this film sparks, quite literally like the ignition of a bike, sparks into real interest. And characterization is when it's not kind of obviously going for something on the nose, and it just kind of happens to be that you're in a situation where you're like, fucking hell, why is this kicking off? What's going on here? Why is he feeling that? What's going on for him? Where's his pride? And all that kind of stuff. So for me, the framing of this, it's not that Jodie Comer was bad, I'm not saying she was, but I don't think her role as part of the storytelling sort of structure was the best choice. I think it was a bit too plinky-plonky. I felt like she was telling us what to think. I felt like the role of her character was to tell us what was happening. We didn't need it. We could see it evolving. And it kind of reduced Mike Faist. It kind of diminished the actual kind of idea of this being a book. I think we should have just gone into this world without the device of necessarily needing to sort of be told that a book was being made necessarily. We could have just done with the story of this biking group. Now, Tom Hardy, I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with Tom Hardy. Well, I've got a love-love relationship with Tom Hardy. I love him. His face, I want to kiss it. I do. And I'm kind of with lots and lots of women and lots of men there. He's got very kissable lips. And so I just, seeing his face in close-up is great. I think he does non-dialogue brooding brilliantly. It speaks to the fact that, okay, music set-up character, and him just sitting there just thinking. You can bring so much to his face. I think he's at his most powerful when he's not necessarily opening his mouth and sharing with us whatever voice choices he's made. And I have to say that whilst I went into this thinking, oh my God, when he's going to talk, it's going to be weird, it's clearly a certain type of dialect and accent. He'll have put lots of research into it. I'm sure it's incredibly right. It didn't grate, and I bought into it, and it didn't sort of pull against his masculinity. I think Tom Hardy actually in this film chucks in, for me, one of his most layered and most meaningful performances. I actually really enjoyed it. I think, in fact, if I was really honest, early in this review, I'd say Tom Hardy's the reason to go and see this film. I think he's the, if you like, beating heart, and at times the kind of broken heart and damaged heart at the centre of this film. And I think if there's one element of this film that I really enjoyed, without sort of any qualification, it was Tom Hardy. Actually, I thought he was a prowling, shadowy, difficult, brooding figure who didn't make obvious choices. It's not like he just becomes a psychopath and becomes violent. He didn't lose his moral kind of compass within the world of motorcycling, what have you. He stayed true to, there's a certain amount of, I mean, this is something that struck me throughout watching this film. To be in a gang and to be riding bikes and driving around, this is no disrespect to people who are into bikes, but back in the day, if all you're kind of getting off on is riding bikes and sort of wolf whistling women and creating a sense of sort of fear and then just wanting to race against each other, there's not actually a lot there to be examined, is there? I mean, there's not going to be layered stuff going on. There's not going to be stuff that kind of becomes complicated. It's going to be a very sort of one note, one level type of toxic masculinity. And that was, again, one of my weird sort of worries about going into watch a film like this. It's like, well, how much can it tell us about power and all that kind of stuff? But I think it does. I think it does take us there. But I think the only character who really does take us there is Tom Hardy. For me, Austin Butler simply smoulders. He simply smoulders. He's beautiful to look at. It pivots around his romance with Jodie Comer. Again, whilst the romance was real and it's a true story, I kind of found myself wanting a bit more about why he felt he had to keep moving away and moving on. There's a lot sort of said about, you don't see men cry. Jodie Comer says, my dad only cried twice, I think when his mother died and when his father died. And so really the note there was, when a man cries, it's got to be about something deep, parental and sort of filial, so that when Austin at one point in the film cries, you're like, oh yeah, this is his family. I mean, anything about gangs ends up being about how the gang becomes the family. But sometimes for me, I think in order for that to work, I need to know a little bit more about the real family, say, that Tom Hardy came from, or the family that Austin Butler had left, to get a sense of what families are they reacting against in order to feeling the need to belong to this new family. And in that sense, I found Jodie Comer's character a bit curious. While she hooks up with Austin Butler, there's a clear sense that Austin Butler's a bit of a nutter, because even in Tom Hardy's book, Austin Butler jumps red lights, gets tickets, is willing to go places no one else is willing to go. There's a moment where he gets into this fight, this fracas at the beginning of the film, where they freeze frame it and then we pick the story up later and the most hideous thing happens to one of his limbs. Oh, the damage to a certain part of Austin Butler's body is just quite something. So Austin Butler's kind of marked as this lunatic who's willing to, he's got no, you know, he can tip over into total fucking insanity and violent rage at any point, which you would have thought was Tom Hardy's character. But in fact, no, Tom Hardy goes on a really dark, internal sort of worming through all the kind of machinations of why did he create this group, how does he control this group, as this group passes through 10 years and modernizes, and young imposters and people want to challenge him and people want to call out his group as kind of shit and needs to kind of modernize with the times. You know, how Tom Hardy shifts across time in this film is really watchable. As I said earlier, I mean, I think if there's one thing that this film does tell you, it's that Austin Butler at some point has to play James Dean. And if anyone is going to play what's his name, Charles Manson, it has to be Norman Reedus from The Walking Dead. He plays a California deadbeat biker with pretty horrendous, I can't work out if he had horrendous teeth or horrendous gums, or what he had was the horrendous gummy love child of the two. But he kind of came along with that clear Dennis Hopper sort of air of acid strapped to his forehead, and he was willing to take things to a different level. Nice moments where they're sort of all racing against each other, kind of funny moments where they all just pick fights for the sake of fights, and then at the end of it they all sit down and crack a beer and kind of drink. You are left thinking, are these just grown-up kids, really? At the end of the day, are they grown-up kids? And does it get any more complicated than that? And I have to say, I think all the while Tom Hardy was trying to give this a lot more than just grown-up kids running around on fast bikes, which sometimes it can all just kind of feel like, what the fuck is this about? I can't say I've seen the book that this is based on, but I have seen some of the photographs, and they're compelling photographs. Though I do sometimes chuckle at black and white photography. Sometimes I do wonder whether the actual skill or artistry of a black and white photograph is really as much as we think it is. And in fact, what we're responding to is, oh, it's so nice that it's in black and white. So quite an average photo can be turned into something quite stunning if you just make it monochrome. Do you get me? It's quite an easy device. It's a bit of a kind of sleight of hand with any kind of image making. Make it black and white, it kind of looks more moody. They plot the photos at the end of this film, but I think one thing I was expecting from this film was for it to look a lot more kind of, if not filmic, a lot more photographic. There are moments at the beginning where they play with the device of certain characters talking into cameras, if it's a portrait being taken of them, but they kind of lose that. And okay, you can't, that would get a bit tiresome if you did it all the way through the film, but I did feel that, I felt that they kind of dropped the ball a bit, and I did feel that they could have had a few more moments where perhaps the, if you like, the photographic wellspring from which this film originated could be cherished a little bit more, or kind of referenced or paid tribute to a little bit more. I felt it became a little bit workmanlike at times, and yet, you know, it was kind of pressing the buttons of, you know, westerns, you know, Tom Hardy walking into a bar, whose bar is this, where's the people, fight, you know, riding into town, and the cops sort of like doing nothing, and, you know, there's that whole, you know, I think the whole Easy Rider thing itself is a sort of inversion, isn't it? A sort of a taking control of, or taking back the kind of ideas of, you know, conventional westerns and all that kind of stuff. So I was surprised that this wasn't as visually sort of stimulating as I was hoping it would be. I thought it could have been more visually stimulating. I think it made some pretty obvious choices, and in the editing I thought they were pretty obvious too. Toby Wallace comes into this, and he's a kind of brooding presence off camera for most of the film. He's the young boy from Baby Teeth. He plays the next generation. There's a kind of value system moment where Tom Hardy says, you can come but your friends can't, and then the boy goes, all right, I'll do it, and then Tom Hardy says, no, you can't come because you've got no sense of loyalty to your team. So, you know, it is a film that kind of nibbles at the edges of what moral rules there are, what are the rights and wrongs, you know, where's loyalty lie, where's family lie, where does the sort of loyalty of gang sort of exist, and at what point do you let someone new in, and all that. But this actor, Toby Wallace, he plays a sort of nasty aspect of the film, and I am going to do a spoiler review as the film kind of grinds on and on towards its end, and Tom Hardy, in a sense, I mean, I thought all the way through it, Tom Hardy's going to take his own life, and something you could argue by the film's end, that's exactly what he does do in an indirect fashion. I thought that was a really interesting kind of narrative, the way in which Tom Hardy let himself go. You see his dissatisfaction, you see his fear, you see him not being able to get what he used to get from the gang that he used to get from it. And I think Tom Hardy was giving us more than it just being modernising and becoming too big and being sort of infiltrated with kind of modern hicks and idiots. I felt that this was more about, Tom Hardy was giving us more sort of midlife kind of ennui, midlife kind of crisis, you know, where is my identity? What am I getting from this? Why did I do it? Has it delivered? I think if there was one moment where the film kind of, as well as Tom Hardy's performance, which I genuinely believe is really strong throughout, there's one moment where I feel the filmmaking, or its approach to character and situation and storytelling, could have been adopted actually more throughout the rest of the film. There was a kind of a moment where we concentrated on Michael Shannon's character, and he talked interestingly about him and his brother, and how his brother went into the army, and how he wanted to do Vietnam and all this kind of stuff, but he wasn't good enough. He talks about working with your hands. I got a real sense of, from him, like he was an interviewee, but he was telling a story within the film. I got a sense of character. I got a sense of place. Michael Shannon performs it absolutely beautifully and brilliantly, and you just feel you feel like he's come out of the dust. You feel like he's actually come out of the carburetor of his bike. He is bike. But I thought that was a really strong moment, and I felt there could have been more moments like that, rather than the rather eggy, you know, Mike Faist holding a microphone and Jodie Comer taking us to places. I could have done with more of that. And in a weird way, I think one of the problems with this film is, you know, that in a sense, and you can feel in a sense, that the film is relying on a photo book, because it is kind of aimless. It doesn't really have an end destination, but I think Tom Hardy gives it some heft, he gives it some hoik, and he gives it some sort of gravitas, and we get a bit of tragedy, if you like, in Tom Hardy. So this is very much a film that sits within the Hollywood tradition of biker movies, countercultures. I didn't get enough of the counterculture thing, to be honest with you. I mean, this is a very different kind of biker movie to California, where everyone's taking acid and mushrooms and LSD and all that malarkey. This was much more sort of alcohol and women. I didn't believe, for example, there's a sort of prolonged scene, a house party, where Jodie Comer becomes quite vulnerable. She puts on a red dress, and there's a moment where really what's being inferred is a gang rape is about to happen. I didn't buy into the fact that she would have been so shocked by that moment. You know, the sexism would have been rife. By all accounts, the original biker gangs that the book was about, they had things like Nazi insignia, they had Confederacy flags. So this film very much kind of, you know, tidies up any kind of inconvenient truths of political persuasions or race persuasions. It doesn't deal with race at all, really, this film at all. And Jodie Comer, I don't think her character would have only at that point felt threatened. And I think in a weird way, Jodie Comer's character is too kind of in awe and too glamorizing of them all. And it would have been nicer if you didn't have the device of her taking us in and Mike Faist doing the interview. If we were just portraying this world, I think we could have brought in more fictional light and shade to her character, where perhaps the whole kind of world was more discomforting for her than it was just at this one moment in this one house party. It's too long. There was a moment where I just thought, oh, for God's sake, I can't do it. I didn't feel the biking shots were particularly inspired. There wasn't one moment where I went, whoa, that's the shot, man. I didn't get any of that. It was much more sort of, Austin Butler smoking a cigarette and all that kind of malarkey. And all I can say is thank God Tom Hardy was in there. For me, this was Tom Hardy's film. Tom Hardy gave it depth. He gave it sort of a dark, sinewy, oily, dusty, mucky carburettory kind of authenticity. And I felt that his journey was the mucky, difficult one, which is well worth getting on board with. So I would say go and see it for him. But all in all, if I was to score this, I would give this film 65 out of 100.